Welcome to Truth Is Here. I'm Mubbina. I've uploaded a number of videos over the last couple of years onto Truth Is Here, onto the internet, onto YouTube, with the intention of sharing my story with the entire world. This video that I am making today is really hoping to just reiterate a previous one or two videos that I've done, previous two videos actually, on the subject of the late Marwa El-Sherbini, who was dubbed the headscarf martyr, and she was murdered in the German courtrooms back in 2009. Now, I don't know whether those of you who have watched these videos have actually understood completely what my grievance is, and so I've kind of felt it was necessary to do another video and allow you to analyse close up the paperwork whilst I add some commentary for the sake of explanation. 2005-2007, I was based in Barnsley, South Yorkshire, here in the UK. I was working at the District General Hospital. Barnsley is a small town and isn't so far from Sheffield, which is a larger city, and it's not too far from Bradford either, which is up north also. Myself, I was born in the south and went to London also to study as a student. So I've spent a lot of years here in the south, which is where I'm actually from. But I spent 2 years in Barnsley whilst I was working as a clinical on-call resident pharmacist, as I was back then. Currently, I'm not on the register, and I've made this very, very clear wherever I go that I am currently not on the register, but someday, perhaps in the future, I hope to return back into the profession of pharmacy. Excuse me. The significant background to my case is that I trained earlier on and completed my professional exams in Carmarthen, which is in West Wales. I did my training back then also in a hospital setting in another small town or market town known as Carmarthen. I didn't actually choose this hospital. I was actually placed in a position where the pediatric tutor pharmacist who became my tutor whilst I was completing my pre-registration training here. This lady chose me at an interview, and that's really why I ended up there. I didn't have very much choice, to be honest, and as I've explained in another video, my interview process was in itself rather strange. That is to say that the interviews that I had with other hospitals in the southwest, in the south in London, in the southwest in Bristol, I just basically couldn't secure a position closer to home and had no choice but to go further away, 3 hours away from my home, Bristol, which is quite a long distance if you live here in the UK. Anyway, so I ended up in Carmarthen in the summer of 1998, and I exited from that town in the summer of 1999, thankfully having completed my examinations and having passed and fulfilling the criteria that the professional pharmacy regulatory bodies adhere to. The year itself, as I've mentioned, as I will say, I've mentioned this here and I've mentioned this there, but I have actually mentioned that the year itself was incredibly traumatic, and I have a thing or two to share with yourselves which I haven't quite completed yet. I make reference to the Dr. Harold Shipman inquiry and some information about his inquiry that has so far never been released into the public arena because it concerns myself, and therefore no one else has ever bothered to look into the subject. And of course, because it directly involves myself, I have a responsibility to share it with the public, and of course because it's really necessary that somebody does this. Anyway, so the year itself was very traumatic from the beginning. I'm talking as early as after the first 2 weeks, I began to have to listen to comments made by my colleagues to do with myself having some kind of a sexual problem, having had a sexual problem as a child. There were comments to do with me being somebody who suffered from ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, which is a condition that very young people suffer from, or young teenagers as well. And there were comments to do with me being adopted even. Many sexual innuendos. I hope to elaborate on them at some point. But in summary, the comments were really trying to make me hear them and understand that I was being treated very, very badly. And at the same time, I couldn't take the bull by the horns and address my colleagues, those who were willing to get down to this very low level and make these comments on behalf of the chief pharmacist and his two principal pharmacists, who are the three main people who were in charge of that department. There was once a technician who had a serious issue with myself. I don't know, the sight of me, somebody who was going to be a pharmacist and in a position to supervise her, a technician, I think that brought out the worst in her. And not just that, I learned earlier on in my training that they had access to information which informed them that I would be famous one day. And I realized some of them didn't like this. And I believe whoever gave them this information didn't like me very much and wanted them to get jealous of me and make my life difficult, which they did obediently, as any automaton would do. They weren't intelligent enough to work out that they were also being used by somebody or something. Anyway, excuse me, I've mentioned the incident where I was being called a psychopath during that year, and whilst I was being called a psychopath, I mean, all of this, I've told you quite a few things. You must be thinking, how were you reacting, Mubbina? What did that do to you? If indeed, all of this really did take place. Well, I assure you it did, because people outside the hospital came to hear of the accessing of my medical notes by my then pediatric tutor, who was very keen to have me. Now, that should make you, how should I put it? That should make you understand that this whole thing is organised. How can you have your tutor accessing your medical notes to do with your childhood, because they were to do with my childhood, and she's a paediatric pharmacist who's very interested in you. And, as I've mentioned in my previous videos, that there was some issue in my university where I was actually doing my degree at the London School of Pharmacy, now known as the UCL School of Pharmacy, part of the University of London, where some people came to hear that there was something confidential about myself that had made its way into the campus amongst students and staff to do with my private details. Nobody ever released these details to me or broke them down to me, but I sensed it was something personal to do with my earlier years, but I didn't get the opportunity to ever really find out until I got to Wales, Carmarthen, where people didn't bother to be careful and were really very unkind. And the scary thing was that it was very highly organised. And we're talking the chief pharmacist and his 2 senior principal pharmacists. We're talking the police. We're talking subordinate staff who would just relish being able to do this to you. They're probably cowardly people, I would imagine, loudmouths, who didn't have the guts to say no to their seniors. I, on the other hand, am a quieter person, but there's no way a senior member would ever ask me to do something like that and get away with it. As I've made clear in more than one job, I was at Pure Time earlier on this year in January, just prior to January. I finished just before January in 2017, December, where I was asked to do things which I refused to do because I knew it would be harmful to the patient. And again, in Jute's pharmacy, I was told to just let something go, and I thought, I can't do that. How can I? These technicians, or 1 or 2 of them, in Carmarthen Hospital, were very loud characters, but when they were placed under, how shall I put it, it's not quite instruction, but when they were asked to do something informally by senior members of staff, something unethical and unkind, they didn't have any issues doing it. And so I was at the receiving end of a very unfair and dangerous arrangement which didn't allow me to address the situation directly, because doing so would put me in the position of them saying to me, well, I don't remember saying that to you. Did you hear her? Did you know, people denying things. And so I had to carry on listening to it, understanding it, and wondering what on earth is this all about. And that was deliberate because, of course, that causes more trauma and more harm. And I still look back upon it and I think, my, how low can some people get? Having said that, there were a small number of people within the department, within the hospital, who were sympathetic, and I still respect them and think well of them. So thanks to them, I still have some positive memories of that hospital. Excuse me. Now, I've had to try and attempt to get hold of a barrister in all of this because in my last permanent employment as a pharmacist in 2007, I was dismissed, having complained of discrimination and harassment. And I really suffered a lot in this job as well, although I enjoy the job very much, I must admit. Anyway, it resulted in myself having to try and secure somebody who could represent me in the courtroom. My friend at the same time, who lives in London, had exactly the same situation, which should make your eyebrows raise and ask the question, how comes 2 of you friends who knew each other, who graduated at about the same time and did your pre-registration training at the same time, qualified as pharmacist at the same time in the same year, how comes you both ended up in this situation about 6 years following on from your completion of your training? Well, they passed a law, and following on from that law, both of us were the immediate victims of the Section 60 Pharmacy Order, which allows the General Pharmaceutical Council and their sister organisation, the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain, to do what they did. And my friend was the lady who put me in touch with a man known as Mr. Graham Settle Edwards, who, as I've explained, is a pharmacist and a barrister. This is a photograph of him and an article that he wrote some years earlier on, speaking of how presently only a select few who, it seems, were on a hit list of those that the society knew about but could not do anything about prior to the new legislation have felt the full force of this, as they have become the subject of applications to the health or discipline committees for interim orders. Now, it is a hit list, and that's why I'm going to just go over this case again to do with the late Marwa El-Sherbini. In July